A graphite pencil has mainly two powdery components in that dark substance surrounded by wood, graphite and clay. The more graphite it has, the softer and darker you can draw with it. The more clay that it has, the lighter and harder the pencil is. So graphite pencils come in a range from 9H, 8H, etc., and down to just H. It then moves into HB, and then B, 2B, etc., towards 9B. 9B is the softest and darkest. 9H is the lightest and hardest graphite pencil. So a 6B is softer and darker than a 2B, and a 6H is harder and lighter than a 2H, and much harder and lighter than an HB or a B pencil. Sometimes you can find an F pencil, which is a slightly harder version of HB, meaning you can sharpen it to an even finer point. So there's no need to really have all these types of graphite pencils. Lots of artists work with 3 or so pencils of varying darkness and hardness. Usually these 3 are fairly close together in range. So I've been sorting through some stuff and found quite an array of pencils here. It's true that artists find their own unique selection of pencils that work best for them. I love rich, dramatic blacks, and so this is what you see making up the bulk of my own collection. It makes sense, to choose pencils that are fairly close together in range, although perhaps not right next to each other, to make sure that there's a sufficient difference between them. So if you want to create a light drawing instead of a dark one, in a high, bright key, you will not need to get a deep, soft, and dark 9B pencil. In a bright drawing, your darkest shade will probably still be fairly light, so you might not need anything darker than an HB. If you want to draw a very dark, dramatic drawing like I prefer, there is no point, excuse the pun, in using an extremely hard and light pencil like an H. So the thin and fine line of an H pencil will just disappear against that brute darkness of a strong B pencil. So choose your pencils only 1 or 2 steps apart, an HB, a 2B, and a 6B for example, or a 4H, a 2H, and a HB. I myself go for something like a 2B, a 6B, and an ebony pencil.
Hey, so I'm pretty well set up with what I need for today's drawing. We'll be starting to work on building a drawing using gesture, sighting and proportion and scale, and then refining our line and maybe adding a little bit of wash with our ink wash. So first off, let's take a closer look at what we need exactly to make this drawing today. And I also have a still life set up, and I want to talk to you a little bit about still life and the importance of it in art and in our work and the drawings that we'll be making. They're not just going to be so boring. You can create some interesting drawings through choosing particular materials that maybe have some sort of meaning.
So let's take a moment to talk about still lifes. So a still life is defined as a collection of inanimate objects arranged together in a specific way. Edward Manet, who was an impressionist painter, once called still life the touchstone of painting. This genre of art has been popular across movements, cultures, and periods, with major figures like Paul Cézanne and Pablo Picasso sharing Manet's point of view. So a still life painting or drawing is a piece that features an arrangement of inanimate objects as its subjects. Usually, these items are set on a table and often include organic objects like fruit and flowers and household items like glassware and textiles. Though still life gained its greatest recognition during the 16th century through the now famous Dutch still lifes, its roots date back to ancient times. So most still lifes can be placed into 4 categories: flowers, banquet or breakfast, animals, and symbolic. While most of these types are self-explanatory, flower pieces tend to focus on bouquets or vases of full blooms, and banquet work features an array of food items, and symbolic still lifes can vary quite greatly. So in most cases, symbolic paintings use different objects to convey meanings or deeper meanings or narratives. So this is best exemplified perhaps by these vanitas paintings. Vanitas paintings are inspired by memento mori, which is a genre of painting whose Latin name translates to remember that you all have to die. So like memento mori depictions, these pieces often pair cut flowers with objects like human skulls, waning candles, and overturned hourglasses to comment on the fleeting nature of life. So unlike memento mori art, however, vanitas paintings also include other symbols such as musical instruments, wine, and books to remind us explicitly of the vanity of worldly pleasures and goods. So that was back in time. Today, actually, many artists put more of a kind of contemporary twist on these timeless traditions of painting still lifes by maybe, using modern day food objects in a more hyper-realistic style. So they utilize works that kind of inspire them to create works that have their own twist on history in a way. So the objects chosen for still life painting often have a special meaning, either on a personal, cultural, societal, religious, or philosophical level. And the themes surrounding the artwork often provoke introspection and reflection in the viewer. So the way that the objects are depicted can evoke a wide variety of emotions, depending on their arrangement, as well as the lighting, color choice, and handling of the material. So these are all things that are taken into account when viewing a still life work, and they are especially important when you consider creating one. So the subject matter of still lifes is determined by the objects that are portrayed in the work. You might explore the symbolism and meaning with objects that you choose. So with all of this in mind, and now we're going to create our own. So keep in mind that when you set up your own still lives, that you have to, really consider what you're selecting in terms of what you're going to draw and what it's going to show to the viewer. So what I would like you to do is to follow certain guidelines. So the first would be choose a still life, that is composed of 5 to 8 objects or more. So keep that in mind. It's not just a single object, it is more. Number 2, your still lives should not include items that were made by other artists for entertainment, like stuffed animals, video games, or toys, or other works of art. Hey, I'm really not trying to be difficult here with, restricting certain objects, but it's important that we learn the basics of drawing and really focus on form and learning how to draw rather than having to deal with flat shapes and things that are kind of distorted or sort of strange looking and can come across in a different way in our drawing. So I'm really trying to help you here as you're starting out. And once you go through class, then beyond that, certainly you can mix it up, throw in some crazy wild stuff. But this is where we're going to start. Number 3, arrange your still lives with care. Think about the relationship amongst the objects that you select. And number 4, select set up a background, drape some fabric or sheet so that there isn't a bunch of background clutter or only empty space. And then number 5, consider lighting. Find a table lamp or some sort, to give your objects a nice sense of light and dark, which form interesting shadows and space. And then you'll be ready to get going on your drawings. Here's what I have set up. I've got this great set of Prismacolor pencils, drawing pencils, which has a whole range of everything that I'm going to need for the drawings I'll be making in class. So today I'm going to choose a 2H, which is hard, and then a B, which is just a kind of middle of the road value, and then a 6B, which is a darker value. And the rest of them I'll kind of leave aside for now. I'm going to have my eraser and my pencil sharpener. You might want to use the kneaded eraser. I also buy these Factus that wasn't necessarily on your list, but I kind of like the harder eraser, but we could try this magic rub and see what it does. And then put this aside. And then the other thing you'll need, obviously, is your drawing paper. Do not draw in the pad, tear a sheet out. You've got this nice perforated edge, so you can tear a sheet out, work on your hard panel. Then I also have a sheet of white paper and just some basic scissors, and then my black ink and a paintbrush ready to go, along with my amazing still life. So I've torn my sheet of paper out from my sketchbook. I've sharpened my pencils, got my erasers and everything handy. I usually have a cup on the side for the pencil shavings. And then the other thing that you want to do is create kind of what I call a little viewfinder. It helps you just find an interesting composition on your still life. So you want to just take a regular sheet of like printing paper or something and cut a small rectangle out of it. Don't make it too big because you're going to be
sitting up close to it, and you want to be able to create an interesting cropping of your objects. So I just folded it in half. I open up, and then I have a rectangle. You kind of look, you want to create similar proportions to what your paper is. Maybe I need to make this a little bit wider. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to use this to look at my still life through to help me define my composition before I get started with drawing.
Okay, so I am sitting down, ready to draw. Here's my paper in front of me, and I'm going to figure out what exact composition I want to plan out on my still life up here. My still life, I've got, like 5 to 8 objects. I take my viewfinder and I put it up in front of me, and I can move it, in and out. Let's see if my camera focuses, but you get an idea of, like, I'm searching for how much of that still life I want to include in my composition, and that's going to help me begin to map out what I'm going to draw. So what I will do is kind of talk you through this with my 3 pencils. I don't want to use all 3 of them at once. I'm going to use them one at a time and start with the hardest pencil first. That would be the 2H. And I'm looking through my viewfinder, and I found a good composition. So the important thing is that you want to think about activating the edges of the paper. So I've got my 12 by 18 inch sheet of paper. You can make it vertical if you really want to, but I think horizontal seems to work for my setup here. And then you want to make sure that you address the entire space of the drawing paper. So make those objects go all the way out to the edges and kind of activate the edge. So I kind of made my still life interesting where I have like a little bit of a cord hanging down. And the first thing we want to do is what we've been working on, fast, quick drawing. So we're going to create a gesture drawing, and it's a good idea to time yourself, make it happen within 5 minutes, get the gesture of all those objects on the paper. So remember that a gesture drawing is a super, quick drawing. Just get some energy behind it, find the spine of those objects that you're drawing. And it's not going to be perfect, but this is where the energy comes in that you want to include on your still life. And after this, we'll go back through and refine things and decide the proportion and scale after that. But you'll get a general idea of where things should sit compositionally in space. So notice how I'm drawing all the way, out to the edges of the paper, getting everything in so that I'm not confronted with an empty sheet of paper for more than, a minute, really, since we're doing this a 5-minute gesture. Do be sure and time yourself. It's important to get used to this process. It's going to help you draw more quickly, respond more easily to your environment when you're having to do something urgently. Maybe you get an idea all of a sudden and you want to get it jotted down and you don't have much time because you have to move on to the next thing or you have to go somewhere else. But you want to make sure that you record that. And I know that obviously you can take a photo, but there's no better way to really make sure you remember something visually if you draw it. You'll have that memory in your brain of having to draw it spatially so that you're not just relying on generalizations that your kind of other side of your brain might come up with, right? So this is pretty rough. I still have a few more minutes, so maybe I can kind of refine things, but the important thing was that I got everything sort of down real quick first. Notice that I have, basically, I think 5 or 6 objects across here. So this HB pencil is a lighter pencil. You don't have to worry about, being delicate with your mark. You can press fairly hard, but you'll still not have too strong of a mark. Or the H pencil is designed to be a lighter pencil for an underdrawing like this. So every single drawing is going to start out with this same kind of gesture and the energy in it. And I think that gets it mostly in there. My time is about up. Again, not perfect, but you get an idea of what I want this drawing to become. So with my gesture down after the 5 minutes, I'm now going to start a new skill, which we haven't used just yet, called sighting. The way that sighting works is that you kind of gauge one object off of another and look at comparisons between the objects and also the spaces between them. So I'm using kind of my salt shaker here and my cup that are in the center part of my composition as ways to help me measure. I've got this 2H that I did my gesture down with, and putting that away, I'm going to move on to a little bit darker pencil, a B pencil, which is going to help me to sort out the additional lines I'm going to be adding to this. So I want to keep that gesture drawing line in there. Don't erase it. I want to see that energy behind your marks. But now I'm going to use this darker pencil to help me sort out the proportions of what I'm looking at. So the first object that you draw, you basically kind of eyeball it. So you want to take it and simplify it a little bit, the forms. So keep it more in terms of like circles, spheres, rectangles, squares, and get the height and the width of each object down. So I have that spine there, and I'm going to get a sense of the height of that salt shaker. As I'm drawing, I am also drawing through the form where necessary in order to get things like a kind of like oval down correctly in space so that it looks like it sits properly. The other thing I'm going to be doing is using my pencil to help measure. I'll hold that up to the still life with my arm extended, no bending of the elbow, and I will put my pencil at the top of an object and my thumb at the bottom and move it down to another object in the still life, which I've got that cup down below, and compare the height of the salt shaker with the height of the cup, for instance. So I can see that the salt shaker is taller than the cup. Then I can actually lay that pencil down on my still life and know the salt shaker on my drawing so far is this high. I move it down and the cup is a little bit shorter. So it looks like it's about right. I might lift the bottom of it up a little bit. So these lines you can erase a little bit, but leave those sort of gestural ones behind there so you get that sense of what's going on underneath in the drawing. And that's something I want to see because I know that you're learning. So remember, process photos are important. So I took a photo of my gesture, which you should also do early on in the drawing. And now we're mapping out proportion and scale, and then we'll take another photo later on. So those are the two main objects. And then once I get those down, I'm going to start using those to help me measure what's around it. So I have a height of this, I have a height of this, I also have a width. The salt shaker might need to be a little bit thinner from what I'm seeing here compared to the cup. So what I'm doing is actually drawing direct reference lines right on my paper, measuring lines on my paper, to make sure that my intellectual side of my brain isn't interfering and generalizing, that I'm actually drawing exactly what I'm seeing, which is important to learning drawing. Okay, so I don't have it perfect. I don't want to see perfected forms until you have a sense of the correct proportion and scale of everything that's on your paper, all those objects in the still life. So I know I've got this sort of blender on the side, not a blender, I don't know, mixer, hand mixer on the side. And I know that it hits against the cup, and I can take a look at like the height of the cup, and if I move my hand sideways, like if I have it this way and then I move it sideways,
then I can take a look. I know the height of the cup is correct, and then I move that sideways and compare the height of the cup with the width of the mixer, right? So the mixer is about, I don't know, 3/4, 2/3 the height of the cup. So if I have that on the drawing and I turn this sideways, then I know the width of the mixer is actually pretty wide. So by using these techniques of forcing myself to like really visually sight and measure, I know that I'm going to get it correct. So even if you feel like, oh, I'm not that great of a drawer, you can really be as good as you want to be by working on these skills of getting yourself to really map out proportion. And also, you know, like I said, draw across the paper to compare the height and width of things. So I kind of have that mixer, the width of it down. I know it kind of goes off the page from what I looked at in my viewfinder. And then I want to figure out, you know, the handle over here as well. So if the width the same out to the handle, if I move it over, it's a little bit shorter. So if this is my width, then I know, yes, I've got that pretty well correct if I put the rest of the handle out to there. So as I go through this entire process, I'm going to continue these comparisons of objects with one another and looking at also like the spaces between objects. There's a space between the handle and the start of the blender that I'll have to look at. And these lines, you know, they will be a bit sketchy, but make sure you're always using your whole arm movement and not this sort of wrist movement. These are rough, kind of getting a sense of your proportion and scale, and we're not focused on details, which is more like the wrist movement. So behind this mixer, I also have a blender that I know kind of hits on the mixer in a certain spot. I know the top of the blender is at the top of the salt shaker, so basically not going to see that. I see only the clear part of that blender in the background. And then this area down here is the black part of it, and it ends close to the bottom where that white cup is there. Okay, so that's pretty good for that bit. Now I want to move over to these objects. And again, you know, start comparing across the page. There's some space between the white cup and the pepper shaker. The top of the pepper shaker kind of hits about right there on the salt shaker. Got this little knob at the top. And you see all these measuring lines that I'm actually putting directly on my paper here to make sure I've got it correct. So basically, as you're layering this drawing, you go from gesture, which is super fast, to sighting proportion, which is kind of like a medium speed, I would guess, or I would say. And then when we get to the last step, we'll slow way down and go back to our kind of contour line that we learned. So I have a few things wrong in the gesture, so I'm gonna correct them because I can see that, you know, the top of the coffee pot actually hits quite a bit lower, and that maybe the blender or the mixer kind of attachment goes a little bit lower. Erase that a slight bit. And then the top of the coffee pot actually goes quite a bit further down here than what I had in my gesture. So I'm getting that roughed out. So at this stage, you should have the drawing open enough and rough enough that you feel fine. You feel just fine with making a change. You shouldn't feel uncomfortable because you've spent too much time on this or that, because really you haven't. Right now is the time where you're shifting, changing, moving things, making sure that you've got them down correctly in space. So it's really this coffee pot that I'm having to change quite a bit actually as I draw. And I'm okay with that because I haven't put any detail in there yet. So it's important that you follow this process and keep in mind that I'm really just here to save you time and energy on not focusing on details that you'll have to change later. So working on the drawing as a whole is important. Seeing the drawing as a whole is important because the viewer will then see it as a whole as well, instead of these like finished off disjointed parts that seem to float and not really fit together in space. So every drawing that I make, I don't let myself finish up some of my favorite parts or whatever. I make the drawing come up as a whole, and that's how it should always be. Same with painting, you know. It's this process of layering and making sure you get things right before you worry about refining details. So I'm kind of drawing through some things to get a sense of the handle of the coffee pot. There's this spout that comes off. You know, see, I'm activating the full space of the drawing page. Things aren't just floating in the center. That's important. That's something I'm going to be looking for. I've got this network of lines that show how I'm measuring. As we begin this third layer, we're going to switch our pencil to the 3B pencil, the darker pencil, or a 6B. I think I'm using a 6B here, and that's going to allow us to lay down a nice, strong, confident line. So with this third layer of your drawing, we're going to slow back down and remember what we did in previous demos on contour line. So this is a slow and careful line. It's very well studied, and where you're getting your eye and your hand working together in slow motion and really defining those edges of forms, kind of refining shapes. You know, in this video, yes, I've speeded up time quite significantly, so keep that in mind. You should be going very slowly, getting your eye and your hand working together, and this is where you're going to have the opportunity to refine smaller details, get edges of forms. We're not worried about value with this, just defining those edges and continuing to practice developing our eye-hand coordination. So remember, keep it slow, keep the line strong and confident. You know, think about yourself as like the most amazing drawer in the world, and you can get this line down and make it look beautiful and finish out the refining details of the edges of forms and shapes that you see in your still life. So contour line drawing should be one continuous line, should not be a sketchy looking line, and show kind of a really nice strong mark. That's where we're using that darker pencil and laying down that line very confidently and knowing that our sighting and mapping has proportion and scale all correct, and just refining some smaller details with this nice contour line, and then filling out the drawing from there. Now that I have my slower contour line worked out on this drawing, I'm going to not add any value. I'm not going to add shading or anything like that, but I am going to try to use shadows to help activate the composition. So I'm using the ink wash with a lot of water, just a gray tone, to find the shapes of the shadows that I see in front of me on the still life. So if yours was not dramatically lit, you might take like a lamp that you have around the house and use that to like give it some more dramatic lights with shadows, and that will help make this drawing a little bit more interesting than just, you know, the line work. So I'm just looking at where those shadows are cast and putting it throughout the piece. And then I might step back and see, you know, if I feel like it's finished. I don't want it to be too black. So again, I'm working out all the way to the edges, as you see here. So it kind of helped that I set up a little bit of a backdrop. I just had like this empty canvas around that I had not used yet, so I thought I'd just put that behind there as a white backdrop, and that helps to define my cast shadows in an interesting way a bit there. See. Oh, I just realized I forgot to draw the attachment to the mixer. I will go back and do that once I finish this. So it's good to like have a moment to really carefully look at your composition and see what it's missing, what else it needs, huh? I have to use a paper towel to sop up some of that blackness before it dries on me. So the ink wash, you know, it can be pretty forgiving. Just dip in the water, use paper towel to wipe a little bit. Hey, I hope you enjoyed working on some gesture, sighting, proportion, and scale, and contour line all together in one drawing. So I will catch you next time for continuing on with our adventures in drawing.